The stagecoach rattled into Portland, Oregon Territory, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1867, carrying 38-year-old Josephine Parker and the bitter taste of rejection that had followed her all the way from St. Louis. Josephine pressed a handkerchief to her forehead, watching through the dusty window as the town materialized from the haze. Portland wasn't much to look at, but then again, neither was she, according to her sister's husband. Those words still stung 3 weeks later, whispered but loud enough for her to overhear at the family dinner where they had discussed her future, as though she were a burden to be redistributed rather than a person with her own desires. "Too old to marry now," he had said. "Might as well make herself useful somewhere." So here she was, useful. She had accepted a position as a housekeeper for a widowed merchant named Mr. Donaldson, who needed someone to manage his household and help raise his 3 children. It was respectable work, and Josephine told herself she should be grateful. After all, unmarried women of her age had limited options, especially those without independent means. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and Josephine gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned. The driver helped her down, and she stood in the dusty street, squinting against the afternoon sun. Portland was larger than she had expected, with proper wooden sidewalks and several 2-story buildings. The scent of sawdust and river water hung in the air, mixed with the earthy smell of horses and the distant aroma of bread baking somewhere nearby. Miss Parker. A thin woman in a severe black dress approached, her expression pinched. "I'm Mrs. Henshaw, Mr. Donaldson's neighbor. He asked me to meet you and bring you to the house." Josephine forced a smile. "That's very kind of you, Mrs." Henshaw's eyes traveled over Josephine's travel-worn dress and the strands of dark brown hair that had escaped her bun during the long journey. Whatever assessment she made, she kept to herself, merely pursing her lips before turning. "This way. The house isn't far," as they walked, Mrs. Henshaw provided a running commentary on Portland's notable citizens and businesses, but Josephine barely listened. She was too busy noticing the mountains visible in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. Something about those mountains stirred an unexpected feeling in her chest, a longing she couldn't quite name. Mr. Donaldson's house was a neat white structure with green shutters and a well-tended garden. The merchant himself greeted them at the door, a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and thinning hair. His children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from 6 to 12, peered at Josephine from behind their father with expressions somewhere between curiosity and suspicion. "Miss Parker, welcome," Mr. Donaldson said warmly. "I hope your journey wasn't too arduous. Please come in. Mrs. Henshaw, thank you for your assistance." The neighbor departed with a nod, and Josephine found herself ushered into a comfortable parlor. The house was clean but clearly lacked a woman's touch, with books stacked haphazardly and a faint layer of dust on the mantelpiece. "The children and I are very glad you're here," Mr. Donaldson continued. "My late wife passed nearly 2 years ago and we've managed, but the house needs proper care. The children need proper care. I'm afraid I'm much better with ledgers than with laundering." Josephine met the eyes of each child in turn. The oldest, a girl named Emma, stood with her arms crossed, clearly the most resistant to this stranger invading their home. The 2 boys, Thomas and Samuel, seemed more intrigued than hostile. "I'll do my best to make things comfortable for all of you," Josephine said quietly. "I know this is an adjustment." That first week passed in a blur of learning routines, memorizing preferences, and establishing her place in the household. The work was harder than she had anticipated. Mr. Donaldson was kind but absent-minded, often forgetting to mention important details until the last moment. The children tested her boundaries daily, especially Emma, who made no secret of her resentment, but Josephine persevered. She had nowhere else to go, after all, and the work kept her busy enough that she didn't have time to dwell on the loneliness that crept in at night when she lay in her small room listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this frontier town. On her first Saturday off, Josephine decided to explore Portland properly. She walked down to the waterfront, where the Willamette River flowed broad and brown, carrying logs downstream from the lumber camps in the mountains. Ships and smaller craft crowded the docks, and the air rang with shouts and the creak of ropes and pulleys. She was watching a steamboat unload cargo when she became aware of someone staring at her. Turning, she found herself face to face with the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to fill a doorway. His hair was dark brown and long, touching his collar, and his face was deeply tanned and marked with old scars. He wore buckskin trousers and a wool shirt that had seen better days, and at his hip hung a hunting knife in a beaded sheath. Everything about him spoke of the wilderness, of places far from civilization, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a startling gray-blue, like winter sky over mountain peaks, and they regarded her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "I didn't mean to stare. It's just you looked like you were studying that boat like it held the secrets of the universe, and I got curious what you were thinking." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just watching the workers. I've never seen a steamboat unloaded before. You're new to Portland." It wasn't a question. "I arrived last week, from St. Louis," he nodded slowly. "Long journey. What brings you to the Oregon Territory?" "Work. I'm a housekeeper for Mr. Donaldson, the merchant." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. "Housekeeper. That's respectable work." "Yes." She wasn't sure why she felt defensive. "It suits me fine." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, and Josephine realized she was waiting for him to introduce himself. When he didn't, she took the initiative. "I'm Josephine Parker, Hank Garrison." He touched the brim of his hat, a battered thing that had probably been brown once, but was now an indeterminate dusty color. "Folks call me the Mountain Man, on account of I live up in the Cascades most of the year. Only come down to Portland when I need supplies or when winter gets too fierce even for me." "You live alone in the mountains." The idea seemed impossible, even frightening. "For the most part. Got a cabin about 2 days' ride from here. Been there near about 15 years now." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "I come down maybe twice a year, enough to remember why I prefer the mountains." There was a story there, Josephine sensed, layers of history that had driven this man away from civilization. But it wasn't her place to ask, and they were strangers besides. "Well, it was nice to meet you, Mr. Garrison," she said, preparing to continue her walk. "Wait." The word came out more forcefully than he seemed to intend, and he softened his tone. "I mean, if you're new to town, maybe you'd like someone to show you around. I don't know Portland as well as some, but I know it better than most newcomers." Josephine hesitated. Everything about this man spoke of danger and wildness, and she was a respectable housekeeper now. She should decline politely and return to the safety of Mr. Donaldson's house. Instead, she found herself saying, "That would be nice." They walked together through Portland streets, and Hank pointed out the various establishments with brief, factual descriptions. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He showed her the general store with the best prices, the bakery that made sourdough bread worth the wait, the lending library run by a formidable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had come from San Francisco and wouldn't tolerate any nonsense. Josephine found herself relaxing in his presence, despite his intimidating appearance. There was something genuine about Hank Garrison, something solid and real that contrasted sharply with the polite duplicity she had known in St. Louis. When they stopped for coffee at a small restaurant, Hank asked about her journey west, and Josephine found herself telling him more than she had intended. Not everything, not the shameful parts about being unwanted by her own family, but enough that he could understand she was starting over, building a new life from scratch. "That takes courage," he said quietly, his big hands wrapped around a coffee cup that looked tiny in his grip. "Coming all this way alone, not knowing what you'd find. I'm not sure it was courage so much as necessity. Sometimes they're the same thing." When the afternoon sun began to slant low, Josephine realized with a start that she had been gone for hours. "I should get back. Mr. Donaldson will wonder where I am." Hank walked her back to the house, keeping a respectful distance. At the gate, he paused. "Miss Parker, I wonder if I might call on you sometime. When you have another afternoon off, maybe we could walk together again." Josephine's heart did something strange in her chest, a little leap that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Mr. Garrison. I'm a housekeeper and I need to maintain a certain reputation." "I understand." He didn't look offended, just thoughtful. "But for what it's worth, I think spending time together would be perfectly respectable. We'd just be two people talking, maybe getting to know each other. Nothing inappropriate about that." "I'm 38 years old," Josephine blurted out, not sure why she felt compelled to mention it. "Too old to be a bride, as they say." Hank's expression shifted and something warm entered his eyes. "Who says? People who don't know what they're talking about, I'd wager." He took a step closer, his voice dropping low. "Miss Parker, Josephine, if I may be so bold, you're exactly what I've been waiting for." The words hit her like a physical thing, stealing her breath. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to start over in a strange place. I know you're honest enough to tell a stranger your real age when most women would fudge the numbers. I know you look at mountains like they call to something in your soul." He paused. "And I know I haven't felt this way in a very long time. Maybe never." Josephine stared at him, her mind racing. This was insane. They had known each other for a handful of hours. He was a mountain man who lived in isolation, and she was a spinster housekeeper trying to build a respectable life. They had nothing in common, no future together. And yet, when she looked into those gray-blue eyes, she felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she had thought was locked forever. "I have next Saturday afternoon off," she heard herself say. His smile transformed his weathered face, making him look younger and somehow vulnerable. "I'll be here at noon if that suits you." "That suits me fine." She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him quickly down the street until he disappeared around a corner. Only then did she realize she was trembling. The week that followed was the longest of Josephine's life. She threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing cupboards that didn't need reorganizing, anything to keep her mind occupied. But at night, lying in her narrow bed, she thought about Hank Garrison and the impossible things he had said. Too old to be a bride. That's what they had all said. Her family, her former friends, even the mirror seemed to confirm it with every line around her eyes, every strand of gray in her dark hair. She had accepted it as fact, had resigned herself to a life of useful work and quiet loneliness. But Hank had looked at her like she was something precious, something worth waiting for. The memory of it made her heart race and her stomach flutter like a girl's, even though she was far from being a girl. Emma noticed her distraction. "You're acting strange," the 12-year-old announced at breakfast on Thursday. "Are you sick?" "No, just thinking," Josephine replied, pouring milk for the younger boys. "About what?" "Nothing that concerns you, young lady." Emma's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. "You met a man, didn't you? Mrs. Henshaw said she saw you walking with some wild-looking fellow last Saturday." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Garrison was kind enough to show me around Portland, that's all." "Mr. Garrison? You mean Hank the Mountain Man?" Thomas piped up, his eyes wide. "I heard he fought off a grizzly bear with just a knife." "I heard he lived with Indians for a whole year," Samuel added. "That's enough gossip," Josephine said firmly, though she was curious about both stories. "Eat your breakfast." But later, when the children were at school and she was alone with her thoughts, Josephine wondered about Hank's past. 15 years in the mountains was a long time. What had driven him there? What had kept him there? And more importantly, what did it mean that he had said she was exactly what he had been waiting for? Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. Josephine changed her dress 3 times before settling on her second-best brown calico, the one that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. She pinned her hair up carefully, allowing a few soft tendrils to frame her face, then immediately took it down again, feeling foolish. She was too old for such vanity, but she put it back up the same way. At precisely noon, Hank knocked on the front door. Mr. Donaldson answered, and Josephine heard the merchant's voice raised in friendly greeting. When she came downstairs, she found the 2 men engaged in conversation about lumber prices and the new railroad being planned. Hank turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression made all her fussing worthwhile. He looked at her like she was beautiful, and for a moment she felt like maybe she was. "Ready for that walk, Miss Parker?" he asked. "Quite ready, Mr. Garrison." They strolled through Portland streets, but this time Hank led her away from the busy commercial district toward a path that followed the river north. The sound of the town faded behind them, replaced by the rush of water and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "I thought you might like to see the river from up the bluff a ways," Hank said. "There's a spot where you can see for miles, mountain views if you're interested." "I'd like that very much." As they walked, Hank began to talk more freely than he had the previous week. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about the rhythms of the seasons in that wild place. He spoke of the silence that could be either peaceful or oppressive depending on his mood, of the beauty that surrounded him daily, of the harsh winters and the brief, glorious summers. "It sounds lonely," Josephine ventured. "It is," he admitted. "But for a long time that's what I wanted. Needed even." "What changed?" He was quiet for a moment, helping her over a fallen log in the path. "I did, I suppose. Or maybe I just finally healed enough to realize I was hiding instead of living." "Hiding from what?" They had reached the viewpoint he had mentioned, a flat rock outcropping that overlooked the river and offered a stunning vista of mountains in the distance. Hank stood looking at those mountains for a long moment before answering. "I was married once," he said quietly. "Back in Missouri before I came west. Her name was Margaret. We were young, just 20 years old both of us, and so sure we knew what we wanted from life." He paused, his jaw working. "She died in childbirth, the baby too. It was a girl." Josephine's heart clenched with sympathy. "I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago. 23 years now. But it broke something in me, losing them both. I couldn't stay in Missouri, couldn't stay around all those pitying looks and well-meaning condolences. So I came west, kept going until I couldn't go any farther, and then I went up into those mountains and I stayed there." 15 years, Josephine said softly. "Give or take. I told myself I was content, that I had everything I needed up there, and maybe I did for a while. But this past year, I started feeling restless. Started thinking about what I was missing, hiding away from the world. He turned to face her fully. And then I came down to Portland 2 weeks ago, planning to stock up and head back to my cabin, and I saw you standing on that dock looking at the steamboat. And I thought, that's her. That's the woman I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. Josephine's throat felt tight. Hank, you don't really know me. What if I'm not who you think I am? Then we'll find out together. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle despite his size. I'm 43 years old, Josephine. I know my own mind. I'm not expecting you to know yours yet, not about me. But I'm asking for the chance to court you properly, to see if what I'm feeling might grow into something mutual. I'm a housekeeper, she said, though her hand remained in his. I have responsibilities. I can't just run off to the mountains. I'm not asking you to. Not yet anyway, maybe not ever if that's not what you want. I can spend time in Portland. I can find work here, make a life here if that's what it takes. You'd give up your cabin, your solitude. Solitude loses its appeal when you've found someone you'd rather be with. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. I spent 23 years grieving, Josephine. I think that's long enough. I'm ready to live again if you'll let me do it with you. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time anyone had wanted her, truly wanted her, not as a convenient solution to a household problem but as a woman, as herself? She couldn't remember. I'm frightened, she whispered. Of me. Of this. Of wanting something so much it might destroy me if it doesn't work out. Hank squeezed her hand gently. I can't promise it will work out. I can only promise to try my best to make you happy, to treat you with the respect and care you deserve. The rest, we'll figure out together. She looked up at him, at this big, scarred mountain man with his gentle eyes and his honest words, and she made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Yes, she said. Court me. Let's see where this leads. His smile was like sunrise over the mountains. They walked back to Portland hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Hank told her about the wildlife he encountered in the mountains, about the time he had indeed fought off a grizzly bear, though it had been more desperate scrambling than heroic combat. Josephine told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her parents who had died when she was 25, about the years of caring for an ailing aunt that had somehow turned into being the family spinster, always needed but never quite wanted. Their loss, Hank said firmly. Any family that would treat you as a burden isn't worth mourning. They weren't cruel, just thoughtless and practical, I suppose. An unmarried woman needs to be useful. An unmarried woman needs to be valued, Hank corrected. There's a difference. At the door to Mr. Donaldson's house, Hank raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. May I see you again next Saturday? Yes. But Hank, we should probably be discreet about this. I don't want to give Mr. Donaldson any reason to question my respectability. Understood. Though for the record, I think there's nothing disrespectable about two adults courting with honorable intentions. Neither do I, but Portland might feel differently. Portland can go hang, Hank said cheerfully, then immediately looked contrite. Pardon my language. Josephine laughed, surprising herself. You're pardoned. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Hank found work at one of the lumber mills, using his considerable strength and his knowledge of timber to earn wages that he claimed he didn't really need but took anyway. Every Saturday, he and Josephine would walk together, exploring Portland and the surrounding areas, talking for hours about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams. Josephine learned that Hank could read and write, that he had a fondness for poetry though he claimed it was a secret vice, that he missed the mountains but not as much as he had expected, because being with her was its own form of contentment. Hank learned that Josephine had always wanted children, that she loved music though she couldn't carry a tune herself, that she was stronger and braver than she gave herself credit for, that her laughter was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They were careful to maintain propriety, never being alone in a truly private setting, always keeping their physical contact limited to hand-holding and the occasional chaste kiss. But the emotional intimacy between them grew deeper with each passing week, until Josephine couldn't imagine her life without Hank in it. Mr. Donaldson noticed the change in his housekeeper and commented on it one evening after the children had gone to bed. "You seem happier, Miss Parker." "Portland must be agreeing with you." "It is," Josephine agreed, folding the mending she had been working on. "Or perhaps it's a certain gentleman who's agreeing with you." The merchant's eyes twinkled kindly. "I've heard you have a suitor, Hank Garrison, the mountain man." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "News travels fast in Portland." "It does indeed. And before you worry, I want you to know that I have no objection to your being courted. You're entitled to your own life, Miss Parker. You've been wonderful for my children and my household, but you're not my property. If you found happiness with Mr. Garrison, I'm glad for you." "Thank you, Mr. Donaldson. That means a great deal. Though I confess I'll be sorry to lose you if things progress to their natural conclusion." Josephine hadn't let herself think that far ahead, but now the possibility bloomed in her mind. Marriage to Hank, a life together. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. That Saturday, Hank took her to a spot he had discovered several miles outside Portland, a meadow filled with late summer wildflowers and bordered by a small creek. They sat on a blanket he had brought, eating the lunch Josephine had packed, and watched clouds drift across the blue sky. "I've been thinking," Hank said, lying back on the blanket with his hands behind his head, "about the future, about what I want from life." Josephine's heart began to beat faster. "And what do you want?" "You." "A home, though I'm flexible on whether that's in Portland or up in the mountains or somewhere in between. Maybe children, if we're blessed that way, though I know that's not guaranteed at our age." He turned his head to look at her. "Mostly I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." "Hank," she whispered. He sat up, reaching into his pocket. "I know we've only been courting for 2 months. I know most people would say that's not long enough to make a permanent decision. But Josephine, I'm 43 years old and you're 38. We're not kids anymore. We know our own minds, and I know I love you." He pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small red stone set in it. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to a woman worth giving it to. I gave it to Margaret, and after she died I kept it locked away, never thinking I'd have reason to give it to anyone else. But I was wrong." He took her hand. "Josephine Parker, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Josephine looked at the ring, at Hank's hopeful face, at the mountains visible in the distance. She thought about the life she had expected, the lonely years ahead as a housekeeper, useful but unwanted. And she thought about the life Hank was offering, full of love and possibility and adventure. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Hank slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, really kissing her for the first time, and Josephine felt like she was flying and falling and coming home all at once. They lay together on the blanket afterward, Josephine tucked against Hank's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them grinning like fools. "When?" Hank asked. "When can we get married?" "As soon as possible," Josephine said. "I don't want to wait any longer than we have to. We'll need to post the banns, find a preacher. 2 weeks maybe?" 2 weeks sounds perfect. They talked about practicalities then. Josephine would give Mr. Donaldson notice, help him find a new housekeeper. Hank would look for a house in Portland, something small but comfortable. The cabin in the mountains would remain as a retreat, a place they could visit when they wanted solitude and beauty. "I know you're giving up your life here," Hank said seriously. "Your position, your independence. I want you to know that I'll never take that for granted. You'll be my partner, Josephine, not my property. We'll make decisions together." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I said yes." Breaking the news to Mr. Donaldson went more smoothly than Josephine had feared. The merchant congratulated them warmly and insisted on hosting a small engagement party. The children had mixed reactions. The boys thought it was exciting that their housekeeper was marrying a real mountain man. Emma was quieter, but she cornered Josephine one evening while they were preparing dinner. "Are you really going to marry him?" the girl asked. "I am, but you're old." Josephine smiled despite the bluntness. "Yes, I am, but apparently not too old to fall in love. Do you really love him? Or are you just marrying him because you're a spinster and this is your last chance?" The question was harsh, but Josephine heard the real worry underneath it. Emma had lost her mother. She was frightened of caring about another woman who might leave. "I really love him," Josephine said honestly. "I didn't expect to, didn't even think I was capable of it anymore. But Hank, he sees me for who I really am and he loves what he sees. That's rare, Emma. That's worth holding on to no matter how old you are. Will you forget about us once you're married?" Ah, there it was. Josephine set down the potato she was peeling and pulled Emma into a hug. "Never. You and your brothers have become dear to me. I'll still visit and you'll always be welcome in my home. Marriage isn't an ending, sweetheart. It's just a different kind of beginning." Emma hugged her back fiercely and Josephine felt tears sting her eyes. She would miss these children, miss the daily rhythm of caring for them. But Hank was right. She deserved her own life, her own happiness. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Hank found a small house on the edge of Portland. Nothing fancy but solid and well-built, with a view of the mountains from the bedroom window. Josephine worked with the local seamstress to alter a dress for the ceremony, a deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. She also helped Mr. Donaldson interview potential housekeepers, ensuring the children would be well cared for after she left. The wedding took place on a crisp September morning in the small church on Main Street. Portland's pastor, Reverend Thomas, officiated, and a surprising number of townspeople attended. Apparently, the romance between the spinster housekeeper and the mountain man had captured the community's imagination. Josephine walked down the aisle without anyone to give her away, her head held high. She didn't need anyone's permission to choose her own happiness. At the altar, Hank waited in a new suit that must have cost him a significant portion of his savings, his long hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the first time since she had met him. "You clean up nice," she whispered as she took his hand. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered back, and she believed him. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Hank kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget they were standing in front of half the town. The reception, held in Mr. Donaldson's house, was a joyful affair. There was cake and punch, music from a fiddle player Hank had hired, and dancing in the parlor. Josephine danced with her new husband, with Mr. Donaldson, even with Thomas and Samuel, who stepped on her toes repeatedly but grinned the whole time. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Hank and Josephine walked hand in hand to their new home. Inside, Hank had already moved his few possessions and arranged Josephine's things as best he could. A fire crackled in the hearth and someone, probably kind Mrs. Chen from the library had left a basket of food on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrison," Hank said, sweeping her up in his arms and carrying her over the threshold. Josephine laughed, clinging to his neck. "I'm too heavy for this nonsense." "You're perfect," he said, kicking the door closed behind them. He carried her to the bedroom where he set her gently on the bed. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the weight of what they were about to share making them both suddenly shy. "I love you," Josephine said softly. "I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone again." He kissed her then, and slowly, gently, they came together as husband and wife, learning each other's bodies with wonder and care. Josephine had expected to feel self-conscious about her age, about the ways time had changed her body. But Hank touched her like she was precious, like she was exactly what he wanted, and under his hands she felt beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Portland settling into sleep around them. "No regrets?" Hank asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "None. Only that we didn't meet sooner. But then again, maybe we needed to be exactly who we are now to find each other. Maybe the timing is perfect after all." Josephine thought about the years of loneliness, the pain and rejection that had brought her to Portland. Maybe Hank was right. Maybe everything had been leading her here to this moment, to this man. "I used to think I was too old," she murmured. "Too old for love, for marriage, for happiness. Everyone said so." "Then everyone was a fool," Hank said firmly. "You're exactly the right age, we both are." She kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into it. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for being worth the wait." The autumn months that followed were the happiest of Josephine's life. She settled into her role as Hank's wife with surprising ease, transforming their little house into a warm, welcoming home. Hank continued working at the lumber mill, though he talked sometimes about returning to the mountains in the spring, perhaps to trap furs or guide hunting parties. Josephine encouraged him, not wanting him to feel caged by their life in Portland. They established routines and rituals. Breakfast together every morning, Hank's coffee black and strong, Josephine's with cream and sugar. Evenings spent reading aloud to each other, Josephine discovering that Hank had a fine speaking voice when he forgot to be self-conscious. Sundays at church followed by long walks along the river or into the foothills, weather permitting. They also visited Mr. Donaldson and the children regularly. The merchant had found a new housekeeper, a widow named Mrs. Patterson who was competent if less warm than Josephine had been. Emma had adjusted to the change, and she greeted Josephine with genuine affection during their visits. Winter came to Portland with cold rain and occasional snow. Hank built up their woodpile and weatherproofed the house, his mountain skills proving useful in town. Josephine learned to cook the wild game Hank sometimes brought home from hunting trips, and she discovered a talent for making preserves and pickles that earned her compliments from the women at church. In January, Josephine began to feel unwell. At first, she attributed it to a winter illness, but when the nausea persisted and she realized her monthly courses had stopped, a different possibility occurred to her. She consulted with the town's doctor, a gruff old man named Dr. Stevens, who confirmed her suspicion. "You're expecting, Mrs. Garrison. About 2 months along, I'd say." Josephine sat in stunned silence. She was 38, almost 39. She had assumed that chapter of her life was closed, that she and Hank would be childless. They had never discussed it in detail, both accepting it as a likely reality of their age. "Are you sure?" she finally asked. "As sure as I can be without waiting to see. The signs are all there." Dr. Stevens smiled, his stern face softening. "Congratulations. Take care of yourself, don't overexert, and we'll see how things progress." Josephine walked home in a daze, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. A baby. She was going to have a baby. At her age, there were risks, she knew that, but there was also joy, fierce and overwhelming. Hank was chopping wood in the backyard when she arrived. He looked up at her approach and his smile faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I saw Dr. Stevens," she said slowly. "Hank, I'm pregnant." The axe fell from his hands. "Pregnant? Are you certain?" "The doctor is. I'm about 2 months along." For a moment Hank just stared at her. Then his face crumpled and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Josephine, we're going to have a baby." "I know it's risky at my age," she started, but he cut her off. "I won't pretend I'm not frightened. Losing Margaret the way I did, it haunts me still. But Josephine, this is a gift, a chance I never thought I'd have again." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes wet with tears. "We'll get through this together. I'll take care of you, I promise." "We'll take care of each other," she corrected. They held each other in the backyard while snow began to fall softly around them. Two people who had thought their stories were ending discovering they were actually just beginning. The pregnancy progressed slowly but steadily. Josephine was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, but by spring she began to feel better. Her body changed in ways both familiar and strange, her belly swelling with new life. Hank was attentive to the point of being overbearing. He wanted her to rest constantly, to avoid all exertion, to wrap herself in cotton wool. Josephine had to firmly remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "Women have been doing this since the dawn of time," she told him when he objected to her gardening. "I'm not going to spend 6 months sitting in a chair." "You could lose the baby. You could lose your life," he said, his voice raw with old grief. "I could also get struck by lightning or trampled by a horse. Hank, I know you're frightened, but you can't protect me from everything. Let me live my life." They found a compromise. Josephine would continue her normal activities within reason, but she would rest when tired and immediately report any concerning symptoms to Dr. Stevens. Hank would try to control his worry and trust that Josephine knew her own body. As spring turned to summer, Josephine's belly grew round and full. She felt the baby move for the first time in May, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her gasp with wonder. When Hank felt the baby kick for the first time, he laughed with delight, his big hand spread across her stomach. "Strong," he said. "This one's going to be a fighter." "Just like both parents," Josephine replied. They spent those summer months preparing. Hank built a cradle from pine wood, carving it with surprising delicacy. Josephine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches careful and even. The women from church threw her a small party, bringing gifts of practical items and advice, some helpful, some terrifying. "Labor's the worst pain you'll ever feel," Mrs. Patterson said cheerfully, "like being split in two." "Worth it, though," Mrs. Chen added. "When you hold that baby for the first time, you forget all the pain." Josephine tried not to think too hard about the labor to come. She was more worried about the recovery, about whether her body would survive the ordeal. Dr. Stevens was cautiously optimistic but honest about the risks. "Women your age have babies," he said during one of her checkups. "It's less common and there are more dangers, but it happens. You're healthy and strong. That counts for a lot." In late July, when the summer heat was at its peak, Josephine's water broke in the middle of the night. She woke Hank, trying to stay calm despite her racing heart. "It's time," she said. Hank went pale but moved quickly, helping her dress and gathering the things they would need. He ran to fetch Dr. Stevens while Josephine waited, breathing through the first contractions. They weren't too bad yet, just a tightening across her belly, uncomfortable but manageable. Dr. Stevens arrived with his medical bag. and a midwife named Sarah, a capable woman who took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. They settled Josephine in the bedroom and Sarah checked her progress. "Still early," the midwife announced. "Could be a while yet. First babies usually take their time." She was right. The labor stretched on for hours, then into a second day. The contractions grew stronger, more painful, until Josephine felt like she might break from the intensity of them. Hank stayed by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to bruise, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You're the strongest woman I know. You can do this." Josephine wasn't sure she believed him, but she held onto his words anyway, using them as an anchor when the pain threatened to sweep her away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah said the words Josephine had been desperate to hear. "It's time to push." The final stage of labor was brutal, pushing while her body screamed in protest, but it was also faster than the hours of waiting that had preceded it. And then, just as the sun was setting on the second day, she heard a sound that made everything worth it. A baby's cry, strong and angry and absolutely beautiful. "It's a boy," Dr. Stevens announced, holding up a red, squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Josephine collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and exhilarated. Sarah cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Josephine's arms. He was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and furious at being expelled from his warm home, but perfect. Josephine counted his fingers and toes, marveling at the reality of him. "Hank," she whispered, looking up at her husband. Hank was crying openly, tears streaming down his weathered face. He reached out a tentative finger and the baby's small hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. "He's real," Hank said wonderingly. "He's really here." "What should we name him?" Josephine asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one, as though choosing would jinx them. Now, looking at their son, Josephine knew exactly what his name should be. "Henry," she said. "After you." "Henry Joseph Garrison." Hank's smile was radiant. "Henry, I like that. Hello, Henry. Welcome to the world, son." Dr. Stevens checked both Josephine and the baby and pronounced them healthy, though he cautioned Josephine to rest and recover fully. Sarah stayed for a few days, helping with the baby and teaching Josephine how to nurse, how to change diapers, all the practical skills of motherhood that Josephine had never had the chance to learn. Those first weeks were exhausting and wonderful. Henry was a good baby overall, but he still woke every few hours to eat, leaving Josephine perpetually tired. Hank helped as much as he could, walking with Henry when he fussed, changing diapers, doing laundry and cooking so Josephine could focus on recovering and feeding their son. "I didn't know it would be like this," Hank confessed one night, holding Henry against his broad chest while the baby slept. "This overwhelming. I loved Margaret and I mourned the daughter we lost, but I never got to hold her, never got to know her. This, having Henry here, alive and real, it's everything I didn't know I was missing." "I know," Josephine said softly. "I thought my life was complete when I married you. I didn't realize there was still room for more love." As summer turned to fall, they settled into a new routine. Josephine regained her strength, and Henry began to sleep for longer stretches. He was an alert baby, his gray-blue eyes, so like his father's, taking in everything around him with obvious curiosity. The people of Portland came to visit, bringing gifts and congratulations. Mr. Donaldson brought the children, and Emma held Henry with surprising gentleness, her face soft with wonder. "He's so small," she murmured. "You were this small once," Josephine told her. "I don't remember it. None of us do, but we all start out this way, tiny and new, Mrs. Chen from the library brought a beautiful quilt she had made, embroidered with stars and mountains. "For the baby," she said. "May he grow up strong and brave like his parents." Josephine treasured these moments, the way Portland had welcomed her and Hank and now their son. This was home, truly home in a way St. Louis had never been. When Henry was 3 months old, Hank proposed a trip to his cabin in the mountains. "Just for a few days," he said. "I want to show you where I lived all those years. And I want Henry to see the mountains, even if he's too young to remember." Josephine agreed, curious about this place that had shaped so much of Hank's life. They packed carefully, bringing everything Henry might need, and set out on a cool October morning. The journey took 2 days, traveling slowly to accommodate the baby. They rode horses, with Henry strapped securely to Josephine's chest in a sling Hank had fashioned. The terrain grew steadily more rugged as they climbed into the Cascade Mountains, the air turning crisp and thin. Hank's cabin sat in a clearing beside a small lake, surrounded by towering pines. It was smaller than Josephine had imagined, just one room with a loft, but it was solidly built and had a certain rustic charm. "This is where you lived alone for 15 years?" she asked, looking around at the sparse furnishings. "Most of the time. Sometimes I'd be gone for days hunting or trapping." Hank set down their bags and lit a fire in the stone hearth. "It was enough back then, all I thought I needed. And now—" He came to her, wrapping his arms around her and Henry both. "Now I know better. This cabin is fine for visiting, but it's not a home. Home is wherever you and Henry are." They spent 3 days at the cabin, and Josephine began to understand the appeal of this isolated place. The silence was profound, broken only by natural sounds. Wind in the trees, water lapping at the shore, the cry of an eagle overhead. The stars at night were brighter than she had ever seen, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She could see why Hank had hidden here after losing Margaret, why the solitude had been comforting rather than oppressive. But she could also see why he had been ready to leave, why he had been waiting for something, someone, to pull him back into the world. "Thank you for finding me," she said on their last night, as they lay together in the narrow bed with Henry sleeping peacefully in his makeshift cradle. "Thank you for letting yourself be found," Hank replied. They returned to Portland reluctantly, both refreshed by their time in the mountains but glad to be home. Winter came again, and they celebrated Henry's first Christmas with quiet joy. The baby was fascinated by the candles on the tree Hank cut and decorated, his eyes wide with wonder. "Next year he'll be walking," Josephine said, watching Henry crawl across the floor with determination. "Getting into everything." "I look forward to it," Hank said. "All of it. Every stage, every moment." As Henry grew from baby to toddler, Josephine and Hank's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course. Hank still struggled sometimes with his fear of losing them, becoming overprotective when Henry took tumbles or caught a cold. Josephine sometimes missed the independence of her housekeeping days, the simplicity of answering only to herself. But they worked through their conflicts with honesty and respect, remembering always that they had chosen each other, that they were partners in this life they were building. When Henry was 2 years old, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, her body older and more worn. But Dr. Stevens monitored her closely, and in the spring of 1872, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Margaret Rose, after Hank's first wife and Josephine's mother. Hank wept when Josephine suggested the name. "Are you sure? I don't want you to think I'm comparing or that you're second best." "I'm not second anything," Josephine said firmly. "I'm your wife, the mother of your children, and I'm secure in your love. Margaret was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. Honoring her doesn't diminish us." Little Maggie, as they called her, was a quieter baby than Henry had been, content to watch the world with solemn, dark eyes. Henry adored his sister, bringing her toys and patting her head with surprising gentleness for a toddler. The years that followed were full and rich. Hank left the lumber mill and started his own business guiding hunting and fishing trips into the mountains, using his knowledge of the wilderness to make a good living. Josephine managed the household and raised the children, but she also started teaching reading to some of the town's children in her spare time, discovering a talent for education she hadn't known she possessed. Henry grew into a sturdy boy with his father's build and his mother's quick mind. Maggie revealed a stubborn streak and a love of music, singing before she could properly talk. They added to their little house, building on a second bedroom and expanding the kitchen. Sometimes visitors from back east would express surprise at Josephine's story. "You didn't marry until you were 38, they would say. "How unusual." And Josephine would smile and reply, "I wasn't too old to be a bride. I was exactly the right age to find the right man." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank took Josephine back to the spot where he had proposed, the meadow full of wildflowers. The children stayed with Mr. Donaldson, who had become a good friend over the years. "I've been thinking," Hank said as they sat on a blanket in the warm September sun, "about how lucky I am, how lucky we are." "Lucky how?" "I spent so many years convinced my life was over, that I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it. And then you walked into my life and everything changed. You gave me a second chance, Josephine. A second family, a second love, a second life." Josephine took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You gave me a first chance. I'd never been in love before you, never been a wife, never been a mother. Everything I have, everything I am now, it all started when you looked at me on that dock and saw something worth waiting for." "You were always worth waiting for," Hank said softly. "You just needed someone who could see it. And you needed someone who could see past your gruffness to the gentle heart underneath." They kissed, a soft meeting of lips that still held the spark of their early passion, but was tempered now with the deep affection of years together. 10 years, Josephine murmured. "It feels like forever and no time at all." "Here's to 50 more, Hank said. "They didn't get 50 more years, time being finite for all of us, but they got 37. 37 years of partnership, of raising their children and eventually meeting grandchildren, of building a life that was exactly what both of them had needed without knowing they needed it. Henry married a schoolteacher and moved to Seattle, where he started a successful trading company. Maggie married a doctor and stayed in Portland, giving Josephine and Hank the joy of having grandchildren nearby to spoil. As they grew older, their love only deepened. They were that couple everyone in Portland knew, the mountain man and the woman who had been told she was too old for love, proving every day that it's never too late to find your person. Josephine never regretted her late start. In fact, she was grateful for it. All those years of being told she was too old, too plain, too useless for anything but hard work had taught her to value herself, to know her own worth. When Hank came along, she had been strong enough, sure enough of herself, to recognize real love and grab hold of it with both hands. And Hank, who had thought he would spend his life alone in the mountains, nursing old grief, learned that healing is possible at any age, that opening your heart to love again doesn't dishonor the love you lost. It honors it by proving that love is worth the risk, always. On a spring morning in 1904, Hank woke to find Josephine hadn't stirred beside him. She had passed peacefully in her sleep, her face relaxed and peaceful. She was 75 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. Hank mourned her deeply, but without the destructive grief of his youth. He had learned, over their decades together, that love doesn't end with death. It transforms, becoming memory and legacy and the continuation of the life you built together. He lived another 3 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories about the remarkable woman who had come to Portland expecting to be a housekeeper and had instead become his whole world. When he died at 84, his family buried him next to Josephine under a simple headstone that read, "Together at last, and always." Their children found letters among Hank's possessions, correspondence between their parents during the brief times they had been separated. In one letter, written shortly after their engagement, Hank had written, "They said you were too old to be a bride, but Josephine, you are exactly what I have been waiting for. My perfect match, my second chance, my love." And in Josephine's reply, "I spent so many years believing I was too old, too late, that my chance for happiness had passed me by. Thank you for proving me wrong. Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me and loving what you saw. I am yours now and always." Their grandson framed those letters and hung them in his home as a reminder that love has no expiration date, that it's never too late to find your person, that sometimes the best love stories begin when you least expect them. In Portland, their story became legend. The mountain man who had hidden from the world, and the woman who thought she was too old for love, finding each other against all odds and building a life that was richer and fuller than either could have imagined alone. Because sometimes, the best things in life are worth waiting for. And sometimes, being too old just means you're finally old enough to know what really matters, to recognize true love when it finds you, and to have the courage to embrace it with both hands and never let go. Josephine had been too old to be a bride, the world said, but Hank knew better. She was exactly what he had been waiting for, and their love proved that the right person at the right time can transform everything, no matter how many years you have lived or how impossible happiness seems. Their story, passed down through generations, reminded everyone who heard it that it's never too late for love, never too late for second chances, never too late to find the person who looks at you and sees exactly what they have been waiting for all along. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? Someone who sees us, truly sees us, and loves what they see. Someone who proves that all the waiting, all the heartache, all the years of being told we're not enough or too much or the wrong age or the wrong anything, were just preparing us for the moment when the right person walks into our life and says, You're exactly what I've been waiting for." Josephine and Hank found that in each other, and their love story lived on long after they were gone. A testament to the power of love, the importance of second chances, and the beautiful truth that it's never, ever too late to find your happily ever after.